Chateau kitchens were often the scene of daily life, grand receptions, or even historic moments. Today, we invite you to discover 10 French chateau kitchens, each with its own history and secrets told by their owners.
The Château kitchen, located in the keep rebuilt at the end of the 13th century, is a room that is particularly appreciated by visitors because of the profusion of objects related to the art of cooking. It's a collection of objects from different eras. There are objects typical from Périgord. Especially near the fireplace, you've got these huge cast iron cauldrons. It's important to remember that Périgord, since Gaulish times, was known for its forges located all along the valley. From the end of the 15th century onwards, these forges were converted to cast iron production. Proof of their know-how is that in the 18th century, these same small forges manufactured cannons for the King's Navy. This is a striking example of factories linked to both war and more everyday objects. The floor is also typical of the Périgord region. It's what we call pisé soil. Pisé is all those little limestone stones, roughly cut, embedded in a bed of sand. These stones are often used to create geometric patterns. Here, we have a checkerboard pattern. This floor was laid at the end of the 15th century and is in absolutely remarkable condition. In the center of the room, you'll see all this pottery, as well as all these coppers. Since the Middle Ages, copper has been a relatively expensive material. It was more likely to be found in wealthy homes. Otherwise, in the countryside, in the more rustic castles, it was pottery that covered the table and was also used for cooking. And in the center is the bread rack, which was in use in the countryside until not so long ago. In those days, bread wasn't baked every day. There were big batches every week. And bread had to be stored to protect it from gnawing insects, so it was hung in these racks.
Let's go into the kitchen. The kitchen is a wonderful place. It's really a wonderful illustration of the evolution of our societies, because in the kitchen, we eat what God and religion tell us. We eat fat, we eat lean, and also what medicine tells us. The older you get, the colder you get, we're more likely to drink red wine. White wine is for young people because it can upset your stomach. And in fact, everything will be illustrated in the kitchen around these two major themes. In particular, the molds will illustrate many religious symbols. The Paschal Lamb, the star that guides us to Christ. In short, there are so many things. And the cuisine here is extremely complete. In fact, during the summer months, you can experience what it's like to have a taste of history. In Château, you've got furniture, you've got lords, you've got lots of things like that. But what is historical taste? In the Middle Ages, there were about 150 cookery books that didn't include quantities. That would have been a sin of gluttony. So our doctor of history here for 2 months is going to build a fire in the fireplace, and we're going to experiment with what is a taste. So you can come and sit around the table and taste what I'm preparing every afternoon in the Château. It's a marvelous place, a place to live. It's a sort of SME here, since we're going to be working with the market gardeners and fishermen of the Loire in a circular economy. Everything will be absolutely preserved. Poultry arrive in baskets like these. We're going to feed them organically, directly from producer to consumer. We haven't invented anything for a very long time. Here, it's part of the restoration work we had to do because the fireplace had half collapsed. You can see the size of this fireplace here. It also illustrates the absence of social security, since when children were born, the lady continued to work. You can see how we were able to deal with swaddled babies. So when he's awake, we straighten up this apparatus. Then when he's asleep, we can put it back to horizontal. It's one of the everyday objects we have here.
I'll now take you into the heart of the chateau, into the kitchens. We're lucky enough to have Renaissance kitchens that haven't been touched up. So here we are in the main kitchen. With this superb fireplace. So you have to imagine the board turning on itself with this spit system that allows it to turn. Here you have the pastry oven. And below, since we have a second basement, you have the same room below with a bread oven. So there's a permanent baker at the chateau, baking cakes and bread. And that's because the household is very, very large. We have a whole family living here with many cousins who come to visit. And we also have a very important domesticity because in the 70s there were still 13 people working here and they invited the letter carrier for lunch every day. So they were not 13 at the table. So the letter carrier would join them to make it 14. So you also have here a potager that is typical of the southwest, but which you can also find in certain other regions. This potager has many, many holes. There are 8 fireplaces in this garden. We put the embers here and allowed for slow cooking, and above all, to simmer dishes and especially to make soups, hence the name potager. So here you have what was called the pile, the ancestor of the sink. There's no water supply yet, but you have a drainage system. We fetch water from the well. This allows you to have a little water at your disposal. And here you see this wall that's eaten away by moisture. So it's related to the crazy idea that our ancestor James de McMahon had. James de McMahon raised the level of the courtyard. And which had not only aesthetic consequences, but above all, catastrophic health consequences, as the structure was waterlogged and almost eaten away. This is the main reason why my in-laws dismantled the yard. In fact, for over a century, the water didn't drain away. It drained directly into the stone. So you can see the consequences of James' work. And it's funny because nowadays people sometimes say that certain chateau owners do anything and everything when it comes to restoration. But you also have to look at what was done in the past. Not always happily, in fact. Every era has its afflictions.
To the right of the staircase is the room that was one of the heart rooms of the Messilhac house during its history, which is the old kitchen. So, as you can see, this kitchen is very much in keeping with traditional Cantal kitchens, with the large fireplace known as a cantu and the 2 little benches inside the chimney that enabled older people in particular to keep warm and follow the preparation of meals, which were of course prepared over an open fire. So this room, which is no longer used as a kitchen, allowed the domestic staff, the family, etc., to share a large part of the day during the preparation and during the meals that were certainly eaten by all these people around this large kitchen. All these people around this large traditional table, which also had, I'd say, a very special detail. The drawer you have here was once used to seat young children. And so the bread was not put away, but the children were seated, thus avoiding the need for high chairs, which were not yet available, and the children took part in the meals seated in this drawer. An element of modernization was added to this kitchen, probably in the 17th century. It was, I'd say, the ancestor of a timer. You have here a clockwork system quite similar to that of a clock, which was moved by a weight. And the weight was in this cupboard. And so when it was time to bake, the weight was wound up. Then you had a string to turn the spit. And once the weight had reached the bottom, it meant that the cooking time had been reached and that the meat or animals that were cooking in the fire were done. As for the rest, in this room you have the traditional layout of kitchens in the region, with a number of hooks on the ceiling for drying charcuterie, vegetables and herbs, as well as for hanging cooking utensils.
This is a 14th century kitchen, so we're a little surprised to see it up here on the second floor. There was a first kitchen here in Ansouis that disappeared over time, and it was in the 14th century that it was decided to build this one just above the first floor. In the 14th century, there were three important elements. The fireplace, never too far away, as they work together, of what we call the potager in French, under the windows. We take the embers from the fireplace and install them here. On top of the potager, we have little braziers, what we call braseros. That's where the embers are going to be set up, and that's where the cooking is going to take place. That's why potagers are often under windows, to facilitate the cooking fumes. And under every brazier, we don't cook anything. We have niches called ashtrays, and that's where we collect the ashes, since they're reused as fertilizer in the vegetable gardens, for example, or for washing clothes. So fireplace and potagers are never too far apart, working together. And then there's the bread oven. And those who know me know that the microwave oven is hidden in this little converted gut. The Sabron-Ponteves family built it as a walkway, and which was also home to the water supply as plumbing systems began to become common in homes. The water is now right next to the kitchen. In the Middle Ages, that wasn't the case. In the Middle Ages, water was in a cistern just outside the door. We'll be going next door in a moment. So here, objects that are part of everyday life. Sugar breakers here, all these objects for breaking sugar, for breaking chocolate. And then, particularly Provençal, and I'm very fond of it, our earthenware from the village of Apt. While our major production centers are in Marseille and Moustier, we also have small-scale production, notably in the northern Luberon at Apt. Since the 18th century, we've been making earthenware, which are quite sophisticated, blending different types of earthenware. We call them mixed earthenware, and this has made the reputation of Apt terres mêlées or terres nougatines, as the Provençals say. And then we also have these terracottas, which were part of our daily lives in the 19th century. These are terracottas with two different beaks. They walk, they're always in pairs. A narrow spout for wine, a wider spout for water. Glazed terracottas specially made for the Provençal market in the 19th century, made in Turkey. That's their originality. They were shipped up to the Beaucaire Fair, where they were unloaded and transported to Avignon for sale. And because they have this long neck, we call them demoiselles. And as we found them in Avignon, we called them Demoiselles d'Avignon, that's it. You can find them in any good 19th century Provençal home.
Kitchen is a room that visitors love. Inevitably, they have a relationship with the kitchen because they all have one at home. You can't tell from the camera, but you can smell the fire because that's the room we use all year round. And in winter, it's our wood-burning heating source. So the main element here is this stove set up by Viollet-le-Duc in the 19th century in the middle of the room for functional reasons. A 360 degrees work surface. So if you like cooking, during the COVID in confinement, we were all there cooking. Well, not here, but if you like cooking, this is great. And so, as you know, it's called a piano because we play on different heat scales. We put the wood in the middle where it's hotter and less hot on the sides. So the question is, it works with wood, what's missing? The question is smoke evacuation. Logically, they came out from here and here. If Viollet-le-Duc had left them here, there'd be no point in putting the machine in the middle of the room. You'd lose that working space. So it reverses, it goes down, it goes underneath, and it goes into the main duct with a system of metal or very thick cast iron ducts. And when the cast iron is hot, it drains naturally. But if the furnace cools down, the pipes cool down too, and the room gets smoky. In other words, you have to fill it up 24 hours a day. And my great-grandmother kept it going well into her 70s. Then one day she got fed up with getting up at all hours of the night to fill it. And someone suggested she buy a gas cylinder and a gas stove. And that's in a small kitchen today. So maybe one last little kitchen detail. The object, one of the oldest objects in the chateau, 700 years old, a barrel funnel. Here we put this over the barrel hole to fill the barrels with wine. So 700 years of wine through the little pipe. See, wine keeps you in shape. Well, that's it. The little tour's over and now we're off to grab an aperitif for real.
So there you have it, Bridoire's centerpiece. These kitchens are unique in that they are all on one level. Usually kitchens are always in the basement. In Bridoire's case, it's rather pleasant, as it opens directly onto the courtyard, with access to the wells and cellars we'll see shortly. So this kitchen has undergone a lot of work. I found a small photo to show you the state this kitchen was in 2011, the year Bridoire bought it. The floor had been partly ripped up, and there were tags everywhere. There was nothing left but this deviated stone, which fortunately, given its weight, had stayed in place. So we put back an 18th century spindle turner which continues to work with this counterweight system. We have this rather impressive copper battery. We usually like to have visitors weigh it to get an idea of just how heavy things are, impossible to lift with one hand. Bon. But it's true that it's a very warm and friendly room, and we like to have a good dinner party in the kitchen for friends and family.
One room I really like is the old kitchen. Look at the strength of this interior architecture, the power of these vaults. And this chimney is over 50 meters high. Just imagine the draft when you're making these amazing flambés. It's a pleasure to show this room and to occasionally invite groups to lunch here. So this is our restaurant for groups. And it's perhaps one of my favorite rooms, if not my favorite room, because there are great vibes here. And above all, a feeling of invincibility of the chateau, of permanence of the chateau. These walls are so thick. So I've got a crush on the old kitchens, which I'll use as a wild card. And 3 of us get together in a day to do all the brass work. We put on our Spotify playlist and work up the courage to do these brass instruments once a year. So also for the record, this is where the Confrérie de Rio d'Anjou meets. Rio d'Anjou is the village's culinary specialty, and it's all inscribed here. On this enameled lava stone plaque, you have here something very important, which is the
Oath of the chapter's dignitaries, disciple of Rabelais, respecting his oracles. Gloire au Rio d'Anjou qui fait glisser le vin. In front of all, I pledge to extol the virtues of the nectar of Brissac and the Rio d'Anjou, and it was all born here. And so ends our visit to Brissac, our discovery tour of this monument which is full of surprises. When you push open a door, you're never quite sure what's behind it. That's part of its charm. I'm delighted to have been your guide. I hope it has inspired you to come to Anjou, to come to the banks of the Loire, and then to go from château to château, from discovery to discovery, and to include in this discovery of our beautiful Loire region, Château de Brissac, its park, its collections. And I look forward to greeting you if our paths cross. In any case, thank you very much, and I hope to see you soon.
So here we are at the entrance to the large cellar. So this level of the house, in fact, housed the kitchens, the storeroom, and of course, all the cellars for the fine wine stored here. And there was a production, by the way, which we found on the plans, a production of 7 acres of clear wine, which unfortunately at the time was not champagne. Since then, a few kilometers from here, we have the appellation Champagne de la Côte des Bars, which I invite you to discover, which produces very, very good owner-harvested champagne. But let's take a look at all this through the bottles, through the kitchen's brassware, and the few souvenirs we were able to bring back. This is the house's old kitchen, which in the 18th century was really designed for preparing dishes and processing farm produce. That's why I took you to the dairy too. It was important to show you that life was truly self-sufficient and that we had here everything we needed. In fact, to make good food and to make quality dinners, obviously, for quality people. And there were about 80 people working on the estate in the 19th century, 30 of whom were domestic servants, i.e. maids, cooks, various waiters and lackeys. But there were still 30 people in a house that received a dozen or so guests all year long. So there was a very high level of attendance. And we can see here, thanks to these few elements, the spirit of the great kitchens in this type of homes, especially in the 19th century. But in the 18th century, it was quite similar. Despite the rather sad and pitiful state of the kitchen and cellars in general, we were lucky enough to find some serving furniture, shelves and racks that were still in place. It wasn't valuable, it hadn't been stolen, but it did give us some credibility for all these sets, which were made from very little, it has to be said. A few auctions, a few garage sales, donations from the region, from people who visit the chateau and give us everything from waffle molds, brassware, plates. What we need is a coherent whole. And sometimes we manage to acquire a few pieces like these that are a little exceptional from my point of view, but which are nothing exceptional for an enthusiast, for a lover of beautiful things or art, but it's a pine slicer. And you can see here, in fact, this is the most beautiful thing, I think. You can see the wear of the knife, which for perhaps a century and a half scraped the plank, and that's great. In fact, you can bet that this thing hasn't changed since the 19th century. And that's what's so great. Here we have a spindle turner from Normandy. It was donated by a visitor of Château de Beaumesnil, which my brother Lancelot manages. I'd like to thank him. He donated a very pretty 18th century spindle turner which has not yet been restored, but which will enable pieces of meat to be removed for several hours with the help of a counterweight. And you can see the gear and pulley system here. The weight was then pulled up. This weight, through its attraction, would then drive the rattle that turned here, which in turn drove the gears. And here we have the fireplace with the andirons. And here it is. 18th century andirons.
We now move on to the kitchen, which was created in 2905 and served until 1995. We move on to the service area, and here we see the loading dock, which was made in 1900 or 1890, I don't know exactly, and is still in daily use. You see, handling it isn't exactly light, but it gives us some exercise and we use it all the time. The visitors are very intrigued and tell me to electrify it. So now we're moving on to this large, beautiful kitchen. We've redone it in exactly the same way as it's been since 1900, and we've been awarded the La Cornue Prize in 2002, which is the award for the most beautiful kitchen of the year. So here you see a cantu, a Cantalian specialty with these two little wooden benches that were used to keep the salt. This is the place for grandmothers. Two figures, always wax figures, whom we have dressed, as you can see, with booklets we found here in the storerooms. And then here you can admire the buttons representing the coat of arms of the Miramont family and the great-grandmother called Rouget. Here then, you still have the old stove that was still in use 15 years ago. You can see the pipes leading up to the water tank, which provided water for the first floor. A little further on, you can see the ring bells, which called the servants. You can see all the rooms. And here you can see the souillarde, which was used for washing dishes, cutting up poultry and meat, in a word, for anything that was a little dirty. So this is the souillarde. The character is polishing the brass.
Now we're off to the castle's kitchen. Kitchen, as you can see, in its original state. Yet time seems to have stood still in the 18th century. That the doors have been closed, that no one has entered since. We have this very large fireplace with a roasting spit, added in the 18th century, allowing food to be cooked, meat or fish in those days. Near the fireplace, a bread and pastry oven, also added in the 18th century. The room is vaulted with aquitaine tile floors, which for their part were installed for comfort and beauty in the 18th century. In the 16th century, these kitchens were only made of clay on the floor, and we also have this wonderful potager. The term potager comes from the fact that here we cook soups and vegetables using glowing embers from the fireplace, from the hearth of the fireplace installed in the openings, which allowed the cooking pots to be placed on top, and the arches at the bottom allowed the cold ash to be removed. This kitchen also gives access to what I call the souillarde. This very pretty room, also vaulted, with this very large stone sink where you could wash and rinse food, to prepare food for cooking and eating. And here too, some of the kitchen utensils at the time, made of iron. It's easy to see how they were used for. Grilling fish, they have the shape. In wrought iron. A very pretty wicker basket for carrying vegetables and fruit. And a few wooden shelves supported by wrought iron brackets to hold all the kitchen utensils too.
So which of these kitchens impressed you the most? Tell us in the comments. Subscribe to the channel and now you can watch one of these two videos.